So today's Lovefly podcast, we welcome the amazing Bobby Dutton, and I have Googled this man. And he's got some great stuff. So we're very, very pleased to have him as a guest. So thank you so much, Bobby, and welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
So for those who get to Google you and go, "Who's this man?" Tell your story. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Professionally, I run an events company called GBM6, and we produce huge, technically intensive concerts, primarily for college and university students. And our mission there is to make people happy.
Nice.
And the way we do it is by understanding lots of awesome technology and doing really interesting things for it. That has been very much at the core of who I am. I want to understand what all the buttons do. I want to understand what all the technology does and how it works, and then use that knowledge to do things that make people happy, that make a difference, that have some sort of emotional result.
Yeah, no, that's cool. However, that's not all you do, is it?
Not exactly. For fun, I'm a pilot. It has always been my absolute passion since I was a tiny toddler, watching every plane fly over my house, watching every air show I could convince my parents to take me to. I was that kid in fighter jet pajamas and posters on my walls, and I always loved it. And the first adult decision I made after graduating from university was to get my pilot's license. So I got a credit card. I started training. I went until I ran out of money. I had to buy a new car and pause for a year, and then I continued. And then finally got my private pilot's license a few years after that. And fast forward to 2020. As you can imagine, the events industry was not in a great place during COVID. And part of what kept me sane was to just keep leveling up. I sat by myself in my apartment and studied and did written exams. And as soon as I could fly with instructors again, I blasted back into it. I got my instrument rating, which lets me fly in the clouds. I got my commercial rating, which lets me fly for hire. And I got my flight instructor rating and my advanced ground instructor rating, just to keep getting better at it and dig deeper into how it all works. And it's been a fascinating passion project, and I absolutely love everything airplane related.
Okay, fantastic. So that's a good lay your sort of like stall out, as we'd say. But also, one of your talks is linked to this thinking like a pilot type of idea. So maybe just give us a sort of a bit of a flavor. You bear in mind the people that are listening to this, they love the technical stuff. They love pilots and like to understand, you can never say enough times why it's safe and all the backups and stuff. So, you go for it. We want to hear. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about this amazing talk you do as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the talk is a major keynote that's been picking up a lot of momentum. It's really taken off, you could say. And what it's really about is how I've observed in myself that all of this pilot training and all of this crisis thinking that I've been forced to learn, which was intense and complicated and scary at times. But not only have I learned how to survive in some really scary scenarios because we practiced it, but it's also affected everything I do on the ground, even the things that have nothing to do with airplanes.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm a better leader. I'm a better manager. I'm a better communicator. I'm a better calendarer. So even when airplanes are not even on the table, I'm operating at a much more efficient and productive place than I was without the aviation stuff. So not only do I think that means I want to help your viewers be less nervous about flying in general, but I want to tell them that not only can it make you less nervous, but it can improve your life everywhere. And I think that's worth digging into.
That's really interesting. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I got a sense of that when I was, having a look around and I was curious about that. So maybe tell us a little bit about how that actually works then, so you said you've been taught to deal with certain scary things and, through training, you now know what to do if that was to happen, without scaring the bejesus out of our listeners. What sort of things do you mean by that?
Well, here's the thing. I don't want to scare the bejesus out of anyone, but the closer I've gotten to the scary parts, the more effective it's been in teaching me how to overcome them. So if people are really nervous, maybe tune out for some of this one, but I think it might be worth going into some of the scarier corners of it if you're okay with it.
Do it. Do it.
Okay. So, well, actually, let's preface it this way for people's sanity. When you're in a commercial airplane, you have at least 2 engines most of the time, right? Commercial regulations require that that plane can not only fly, but that it can climb with only 1 engine working. And I think that's very comforting because the worst case scenario is typically engine failure, right? That's what people worry about if you had to really decide what that scenario is. And so let's talk about what the worst case realistic scenario in a commercial plane as a passenger, because it's not that bad. You probably think you're flying along, there was a screw loose in one of the engines because of some mechanical oversight. It falls out, it destroys the engine catches on fire, and then in your head, in your head you say, oh my God, this plane can't fly anymore. It's just going to drop like a rock straight down into whatever point is below me. And that is a terrifying scenario, but the truth is, if you've created that scenario, it's fiction. And there's a great ancient Roman philosopher quote from Seneca that says, we experience more worry in our imagination than in our reality, right? And this is the perfect example of that, because we've concocted this horrifying story and allowed it to scare us over and over without ever really asking the question, is that the scenario that I should be worried about, that is even remotely possible? And it's not. And I think that's really cool, because what people don't realize is in that scenario, you lose, the screw comes out, you lose an engine, right? You don't drop from the sky. What would you really do? You would, your pilots would decide, okay, this is a situation that, needs some attention, needs some adjustment. You would land safely at a nearby airport, taxi safely to a gate, get off the plane, and you'd be annoyed at being in the wrong place. That's, I would say, the worst case realistic scenario for an engine failure on a commercial flight. And yeah, it's annoying, but it's not this catastrophic thing that everyone's worried about. So maybe that will give people a little comfort in just a realistic thing. And when I fly with people in smaller airplanes, they're shocked to realize how much the plane wants to fly. Even when you only have one engine, right? If you go idle on the engine, it doesn't fall, it glides, right? And we can get into some of the mechanics of that shortly if you like, but planes want to fly. Even if you lost 2 engines, all of your engines at 38,000 feet, which never happens because the chances of that are so astronomically slim, you don't really have to worry about it. But even if you did, I like to ask people the question, where do you think you would land if you had no engines all of a sudden? And they say, oh, in the mountains, in the ocean, on the ground, on a farm, on a highway. Okay, I guess those are all possible. But when you're 38,000 feet in the air and have gravity bringing you towards the ground in a controlled way, your worst case scenario, even with no engines, is probably landing at an airport, which is, again, not the worst thing in the world. No. It might be a bumpier landing than you want. It might be an airport that you'd prefer not to land on, but that's your first choice of a landing spot, is an airport, even in an emergency, especially in an emergency. So that's interesting to think about. All of that being said, okay, what if you only have one engine? You're not 38,000 feet off the ground, and that one engine stops. And to be clear, when we train for this, you're flying with an FAA examiner who's testing you for a new license or a new rating, or to determine whether you're current to fly safely. And he'll just reach over and take your throttle and bring it all the way back to idle. So your engine is now generating 0 power. And the dark pilot joke here is that the propeller on the front of a single engine airplane is the air conditioner. And you know this because if it stops, you can see the pilot start to sweat, which is classic pilot jokes. And but joking aside, obviously that's this scenario where it's like, okay, I gotta do something to survive this. And this is where we get into kind of the scary stuff, but again, for good reason. So the first time this happens, or the first time you think about it, or the first time you're tested on it or practicing it, as you can imagine, you're terrified, just like everyone would imagine. You're nervous, your heart's beating fast, you clench up all your muscles, you're in a very poor physical state to do excellent emergency flying. and it's terrible.
Yeah.
And the biggest emotional shift that I've seen is having done that a bunch of times, passed a bunch of tests with it, practiced the scenario, memorized the steps. Now, if my engine were to fail, yeah, I would be scared, but my brain would say, okay, it won't serve me at all to go into all these freak out moments. I've got a very limited amount of time, and I've got to make really good choices to keep myself safe and to keep the people in this airplane safe and to keep the people on the ground safe.
Yeah.
So by necessity, I need to make good use of this time, and I need to go through these steps efficiently. And just this performance by necessity is a fascinating concept. And there's been a lot of studies on this. There's a book called Finding Superman, and it just talks about extreme athletes. And it says, how do they survive these threading the needle scenarios when it seems so unlikely that they could? And the answer is because if they don't, the consequences are serious. And that unlocks this magical superhuman state of performance. And that's kind of a cool thing, even though we only see it when the situation is a little scary. But so let's go into that space for a second where, okay, I'm in a single engine airplane, I'm by myself, I'm 2,000 feet off the ground, which isn't very high, and all of a sudden I have no power, right? It's scary, but what do we actually do? The first thing, my grandfather always taught me the three most important things about flying are airspeed, 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 right? Because that's how airplanes work. That's how wings work. If the wings are moving fast enough, they're generating lift. I'm sure you've talked about the fundamentals of lift, but all you need to do to keep an airplane flying is keep air moving over the wings fast enough. Because if you're going 0 miles an hour, the wings are very heavy pieces of metal filled with gas. But if you're going past a certain speed, depending on the airplane, they get light enough to counteract all of that weight. And now they're carrying you. So at that moment, 2,000 feet off the ground, I have no power. I need to keep air moving over the wings. This is an interesting thing because there's one way to do it without an engine. Do you know what that is? Or can you think of what that is?
Oh, is it interactive?
If you want it to be.
Are you going to glide? You're going to put your nose down a little bit.
Exactly. And that's a great life lesson because it's a great example of when the only thing that can help you feels totally wrong.
Yeah.
Because when you have no power, you don't want to land on the ground because the ground is scary and hard and inhospitable. So you want to nose up, and every student pilot will nose up, and then you go slower because you have no power. And now you're stopped in the air 2,000 feet off the ground, which is much, much worse than moving quickly with no power at 2,000 feet off the ground. So you're exactly right. You nose down. And there's a very specific speed for the airplane you're in, which you definitely have memorized. And it's your best glide speed. And that says if I'm going, sometimes it's about 92 knots in these smaller single engine airplanes. And it says that's the speed that if you can maintain it by controlling your pitch, right? So slower, faster, just gravity. If you can maintain 92 knots, you have the best lateral range to glide to, which gives you lots of options. So that's A is airspeed. Manage your airspeed at that best glide velocity.
So Bobby, when that FAA person then pulls back and says, "Oh, you've got engine failure,"
Yeah.
do you literally just have to go and land as a glider, or do they watch what you do, and then once you get to a certain point, then say, "Okay, fair enough, carry on," or do you go the whole way? What happens?
Federal air regulation says you can't be within 1,000 feet of people or property unless it's a real emergency. So you usually get down close to 1,000 feet, and then they say, "Okay, put the power back in. Let's get back up to a safe altitude." And then they'll say, "So do you think you would have survived that emergency if we were to continue it?" And hopefully the answer is yes. But it's a fascinating thing. So managing airspeed, and then there's this whole checklist. The next one is B. So we're going in alphabetical order. A, airspeed. B, best place to land. All right, now that I'm managing that airspeed, where am I going? Because I got to figure that out because the clock's ticking. And first, is there an airport I could land on within the range I can get to? Maybe. If you were really high or in a congested area, probably. So that's important. If not, if you're too low or too slow or in an area that doesn't have a lot of airports, Then we start looking for other options, fields, highways.
Yeah.
We don't look for water in small airplanes because typically the wheels don't retract.
Yes.
A wheel hitting the water is not a safe landing at all. You would be in a bad place. So A, airspeed. B, best place to land. These are priorities in order, right? One thing at a time. And then C is cockpit, right? Let's look around. Can I fix this? Did I knock the key out? Can I just restart this engine, continue my flight? Maybe. Let's not assume we're going to be in the ground in 10 minutes. Let's try to stay in the air if we can.
That's interesting, isn't it? That you, in the order that you're doing that you're doing, that you really go, well, okay, so that's happened now, and now we are set up and we're okay.
Yeah,
I can now actually, because the first thing naturally you'd want to do is see. Actually.
Right.
That makes more sense, doesn't it? Well, of course, what's going on here? Fiddle with the controls.
Yeah, I would argue that maybe the first instinct for a lot of people would be ask for help. Help, my engine's failed. Can someone tell me what to do or rescue me? Sometimes we're used to that, having that support when we need it. But that comes much later. Because it's exactly. The airspeed first, because that's what gives us the best options. Right? So the prioritizing is one of the big takeaways in life that comes from flight training. And this is exactly why, because the order makes a big difference. So check the cockpit. Can I get fuel from a different tank that might help my situation? Maybe I ran out of gas on the left and forgot to switch to the right. Can I turn a fuel pump on to try to help gas get in there? Did I do anything with the mixture? All these detailed things that might help the engine work again. Try all that. All right, that's ABC. Now none of that's working. We're still gliding at 92 knots, aiming for a very specific best option. And we've checked the cockpit and nothing's helped get the engine back on track. Next is D. This is declare an emergency. So now we are going to get on the radio, say, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is who I am. This is where I am. This is what I'm doing. I'm attempting an emergency landing around this location. Then somebody might say, hey, there's a airport. Turn left 90 degrees right now. And you look, and maybe there's an airport. And maybe that's your new choice. There's also things on the transponder. I can declare an emergency on the radar by dialing in 7700. And now every airport within 100 miles sees my little airplane dot on their screen light up and says, this person's in trouble. And they'll be routing other traffic out of the way. They're going to even start rescue operations now. And again, this is where we get into the scarier parts that people don't want to think about. But I find that's an odd sort of comfort in it, because
me too.
In this communication, I'm going to tell them some really scary things. I'm going to say, there are 3 people on the airplane. My airplane is blue, and I'm trying to land in this field. Why am I saying these things? How many ambulances are they going to send? We might not crash for 10 minutes. We might not crash at all. But now I've got 3 ambulances on the way to the area where they think we might show up and need help soon. That's nice. The color of the airplane is, they might have to have people looking in the woods for a crashed airplane. Now they know they're looking for blue metal. That's part of their briefing in the search, which may never happen. Again, scary, but good. And then as we get to a point where we know we're going to crash into this, maybe there wasn't even a field to land in. It's going to be pretty bad woods, not a good place to glide onto a safe landing. But now we're making decisions like, I'm going to shut off the gas. I'm not even going to try to send gas to the engine anymore. It's past that. Gas is only going to make the fire worse now. Gas is my enemy. Cut it off. Same with power. I don't want sparks in my crash site, so I'm shutting off all the electronics. I'm saying goodbye on the radio because I don't want a radio on anymore. So all the switches go off. I'm even opening the door of the airplane before I crash, because once it gets scrunched, it might not work anymore. So the doors open sooner, right? And again, if I can still start my engine after all this by some miracle and climb up and get back on with my day, great. But I'm still getting ready for all this in the worst way. And it's crazy. And then the very last scary one, which thankfully I've never had to do or even really heard of. But if you're at the end of a really bad crash landing situation and you're in the woods and you're going to hit trees, I want the trees to hit the wings, because the wings will slow me down and I might still survive in the non-smashed fuselage of the airplane. So I'm sorry if this is terrifying for people, but I hope it kind of shows you that there's a lot of really pragmatic
Yeah.
steps and thinking and training that go into this scenario,
Yeah.
so that if you get into it, you're making good choices all the way along the way, and then hopefully having a much better outcome than most of us were terrified about before.
Yeah, well, I think if anyone's still managed to still be listening or watching at this point, well done. I think the message, well, no, I think it's important because when we talk to other pilots, they don't always go into the, that's like, what's the really worst case scenario? And for some people who like to know, well, what would you do? And what would you actually do? That might be helpful, because that might be filling a gap for them. I know for others, they might now be visualizing it, thinking it. So we need to think, this is the level of training that all pilots are going to think like, well, if absolutely we can't do anything else, this is what we will do, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
People have been quite scared when they've landed at an airport, and then all the fire brigade have come down near the airport, have come down, and they go, oh, something's happened, and then that's given them the fear of flying. But it was the fire service practicing their drills.
Yeah.
If they don't kind of clock that that's what's going on, this is the sort of level, isn't it? You're always thinking, well, what if? There's always a plan.
Yeah, and the availability and willingness of people to help is really amazing too. Recently I had a situation that wasn't an emergency, but it was a concerning moment where I was taking off. I was with one other pilot, and we went full power at the end of the runway. We started to roll, and we noticed the power was not quite the voltage we expected. One of our alternators, it wasn't in the green, it was a little low. And we said, okay, this might be nothing. This plane might be perfect for the next 10 hours. I have no idea. But it's a tiny bit concerning. And one thing they say is it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground.
Yes.
And so we made the quick instinctive decision. We said, okay, we can definitely safely not take off right now.
Yes.
So let's do that. And I remember so you cut the power, you make sure you have enough runway to decelerate safely. Because obviously aborting a takeoff too late can be a bad thing too. But I remember I called the tower and I just said, hey, we're aborting the takeoff, because first I stopped the engine, then I started braking, did all the flying, because first fly the airplane. Yeah. Then I said, the tower probably wants to know why I'm still on the ground. Yeah. I said, hey, we're aborting this takeoff. Because they need to know. They need to know that if someone was trying to land behind us and we're not doing what they expected, we all need to communicate. And they were they said, okay, like, do you need assistance? Do you want to send fire trucks out? Can you pull off on this place? We'll come to you. It was overwhelming assistance. And I didn't need anything. I just needed to just stop for a minute and play with some buttons on the ground and get back to the beginning. And we ended up flying that day. But it was comforting to know that everyone scrambled to get out of the way, get the help we needed, give us information, give us support. And the fact that there are systems in place to help is wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a really nice message as well for people to think about this community that is aviation, which it is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And there's another interesting thing that happens, which is obviously everyone wants every flight to go well. And obviously nobody's excited when things go bad, but there is this part of us that comes alive to perform when we have to. And it's a really interesting thing. And I think of this as when I ask why are passengers nervous, right? There's a few reasons that it could be. One, we can't control it.
Right?
And that's scary because it's a high stakes scenario that could be dangerous and we have no control. But in that one, unfortunately, the advice is don't worry about what you can't control. Like, don't fly if you're not okay with that vulnerability. But that stress doesn't serve you because it makes no difference. It doesn't benefit you at all. It only hurts you. So obviously it's easier said than done, but to acknowledge that stress is useless sometimes is helpful. The second scenario, I think, to think about is that we don't understand the flying. So we have no idea how to fix it, how it works, how this magic is happening. Why are we at 38,000 feet and not 39,000 feet? Why aren't we crashing into flights returning from the same destination? Aren't they on the same path? I don't know. And it's just this lack of knowledge. So obviously, the more knowledge stacking you can do, the more comfort you'll find there. I think there might be one third subconscious fear, which is I, as a passenger, assume that if I was in the cockpit and we had a problem, I would have no idea how to get us into a safe or survivable scenario. How could anyone possibly keep us safe when there's 200 of us on here? We're going 800 miles an hour and we're 38,000 feet off the ground. If we lost those engines, how could that work, right?
Yeah.
You're putting yourself in the pilot's shoes. And then on top of that, we think about, okay, well, how do these pilots sound when they talk to us? And based on what we've talked through today, you realize that the communication piece, updating the passengers, is pretty low on their priority list most of the time. So they've already done all the important, complicated stuff. And now they're like, okay, I'm done with that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Here's the plan, FYI. They sound bored. And we talk about that. We make fun of pilots for sounding bored. And they're not bored. They're just really organized, really good at prioritizing, and they're busy. They're doing something. And there's this amazing graph called flow state. And it's a whole thing, a whole TED talk, a whole school of thinking. And flow state is that mental place you go to when you're doing something you were born to do, and time slips away, and the activity itself is its own reward. You're hyper focused and happy, and it's a great thing. And we've all seen that in different pieces of life. It's defined as when you're being highly challenged in something that you're very skilled at. So high challenge and high skill equals flow state.
Yeah.
And that's the good one. That's the high, right? So the top right of the graph, if you will. But thinking about the other places in this graph is interesting, because if say you're extremely challenged in an area that you're not skilled at all in, that's anxiety and stress. Yes. So that's why we think if I was in the cockpit, I would be so stressed out right now. So I'm feeling that stress now because of, hypothetically, I assume I'm the same as the person in the cockpit, which I'm not, but there's this subconscious anxiety that comes from that. When the reality is, when the plane is doing its job and the flight is going exactly according to plan, where does that pilot fall on this flow state graph? They're very skilled, but not challenged at all, right? And you know what that looks like on the graph? It's something between boredom, relaxation, and control. This is exactly how they sound. Yeah. But getting back to this coming alive in a crisis moment, if that pilot who is highly trained and highly skilled goes from, I'm bored because this isn't very challenging because I did this flight 17 times this week and it's easy and predictable and I've seen it before, but now I lost an engine. Now it's getting more challenging. And for better or for worse, mentally, they're going into their flow state, their high skill, high challenge. It's time to shine. And that's when all these procedures come alive. That's when even the air traffic controller's like, all right, something crazy is happening. We got to act fast. We've got to rally some support. We've got to communicate. We've got to make really good choices in a really short amount of time. And there's this thrill to that. That again it's not a good thing, but it's better than everyone going, the engine stopped working. How are we going to get it?
It is good. Well, it's obviously not great. You could say it's not great that something's happened, but that's why you've got these highly skilled people there in that situation. And if people listen to this, think about something that they're great at.
Yes,
they can definitely relate to this.
Absolutely.
As long as they find something that they're able to shine at, I'm sure they'll be able to think of a comparable,
and especially thinking about something that you've gotten a lot better at over time. Like when I think about working big events, the first time I saw a concert for 10,000 people with, tons of complicated, dangerous electronic things. There's lots of potential hazard. There's a lot of planning that needs to go well. And the first time I said, this is what I want to do, it was cool, but it was scary. Like, there's a lot to think about. I got to remember this and double check this. And of course it's still important, but now I find myself in that environment. I'm very comfortable. I say, we've done this before. We love this. This is what we're good at. And as a team, we're able to really thrive because we've gotten good at it and we can operate much more effectively. And you're right. That's that's something that people can relate to. So remember to give the pilots credit for that development that's earned them the licensing to sit in that seat so comfortably that they sound bored.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, some of our pilots used to say a good flight is boring. That's what you want. For commercial aviation, a good flight's boring.
There's another semi-dark pilot joke, which is a great landing is one that you can walk away from, and an excellent landing is one that they can use the airplane again after. But the point is, if you get people on the ground safely, that's all we need to do to check that box.
Yeah. Good bit of pilot humor. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. They're always dark for some reason, but they're always very clever.
Yeah. So I was wondering, you said something earlier on, I thought that would be quite interesting. You said that some of the things that you've learned from training as a pilot that you've directly applied, and without obviously stealing your keynote speech, I'm interested in some of those sort of ideas so people could relate to the everydayness of how you've applied things.
Yeah. I think if I had to summarize it all in one word, it's prioritizing. We all feel stressed on the ground. Everyone. It's universal. If you ask someone how they're doing, unfortunately, in this day and age, they always tell you how busy they are. Yeah. Even if they're busy with good things. Just crazy. I got to take the kids to here and go to here and solve this thing and go to work. I've got 50 text messages I haven't read. I've got 8,000 emails in my inbox. I'm buried in it, right? And you're not really... The problem is really that you have no idea which of these things are the most important and which ones can go away. So before you deal with a single one of them, you need to put them in order. And the way pilots would do that broadly is first aviate, fly the airplane, right? So this means I don't need to tell the tower what I'm doing. I don't need to update my passengers. I don't even need to know which direction my next waypoint is. I just need to fly the airplane in this moment safely, right? And on the ground, maybe that means I need to have a coffee or book enough time to go to the bathroom before my next meeting so I'm not, distracted. So first, just fly the airplane, and you are the airplane in this case. Secondly, navigate. Figure out what you're doing next, where you're going next, where you need to be, when you need to be there. Pilots talk about staying ahead of the airplane, which is this feeling of this moment is solved. I'm expecting in 20 minutes to enter New York airspace. I know I'm going to need this frequency to call them then, so let me write that down, get that dialed up so it's ready to go. I'm visualizing the short-term future, and the better I get at it, the longer-term future, so that when the flight of life goes smoothly, it's exactly what I planned for, exactly what I expected. I'm doing one thing at a time in the right order, and the result of that is you get a lot more done because you're only doing the important thing in the moment at that time. So aviate first, fly the airplane. Navigate second, have a plan, use your calendar, be intentional about where you're going next. And then third is communicate. And again, that's the third priority. So after we've done those two things and I've solved the airplane and I know where I'm going next and I'm feeling on top of it, okay, who needs some information from me? Who do I need information from? Let's talk about some intentional emails or texts, and that's the third priority. But the key is prioritize, and more importantly, know that we can only do one thing at a time. Multitasking is this trendy myth, and it's just not true. Like, yeah, you can drive your car and listen to a podcast at the same time. I just listened to your podcast in the car this morning. It was great. But I can't fly an airplane well and do my taxes well. Heck, I can't do my taxes at all, but that's a different story. Yeah. You can't give your full attention to two things at once. Some people are really good at task switching, which is great. But having two things going on in your consciousness at once only makes the results worse and less timely. And so if we can learn to organize that pipeline and say, okay, now I'm going to do this. I expect what I'm going to be doing in an hour is this. That'll be fine when I get there. Now the rest of it kind of falls away. So those other 7,999 emails are not dragging me down at all because either they're gone or I'm confident that I'll get to them when I should.
Yeah. That's nice. That's quite a nice way to think about it. I was wondering what you did, because I expected, I was thinking I was going to talk about the human factors stuff, you know, and like that's what I thought your talk might be, because but that's a really interesting way to position it. And some of our other pilots have talked about that, you know, aviate, navigate, communicate.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a really good way of linking it. Yeah, that's really cool. So what about so a couple of questions I always ask the pilots and stuff. So, and I'm going to ask you this one because I feel like you've really recently concentrated so much on it, particularly during the pandemic, that it's really fresh in your mind. Now, I wonder what it was like going from like the single pilot operation to the dual pilot. How does that feel? You know, when you kind of mastered it for yourself, and then you've suddenly got to do it in tandem with somebody else. How was that?
Well, my only experience with two pilots is either for fun or if I'm the instructor. I don't have any experience flying a jetliner. I have never made this my job, even though I'm qualified and licensed for it.
Yeah.
And I would love to. And part of the whole COVID flying thing was it was a pretty cool backup plan to know that if I needed to, airlines are desperate for qualified pilots, and I could probably get a bonus and some jet fuel and some fascinating training, which would be great. But I also love having this be my fun side thing on my terms. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
But having someone else in the plane does change things, particularly when you start to be an instructor.
Yes.
You fly in the right seat because the student is in the left seat as if they were the pilot. And for one thing, just the sight picture changes. Seeing how a runway is lined up when you're over here instead of over here is different. And in some of the planes I fly, the Cirruses, instead of a yoke being two hands on the center, it's one handle on the side. I'm a left-handed person, and I like that when I'm in the left seat with my left hand. That feels very natural. And all of a sudden I was in the right seat with my right hand, which I can barely do anything with, and the runway looks different, and this person doesn't know how to land a plane. So that was interesting to go through that.
That's a great word. Yeah. I don't know if interesting is the word I would have used, but yeah, terrifying maybe.
Yeah, well, watching students and studying how to teach this stuff was fascinating. I didn't expect the complexity of the training to go as deeply as it did into psychology. There were 3 written exams for the flight instructor license. The first one had nothing to do with airplanes. It was about learning, how people learn. And that made me a much better pilot because, you know, we talk about the importance of understanding how things work and why this is happening. To get into some really specific things about how people are going to mess it up, I know exactly what they're going to do wrong because they haven't learned a very specific piece of it yet. And we can explain it, we can talk through it, but now I just understand it better. And an example of that is people know you've got this control for flying, right? So that's called the yoke, and it controls roll. So if we go this way, the plane wants to twist like that. And if we pull it back, most people know that it controls pitch, right? So the nose comes up when we pull up, and it goes down when we go down. But there's some more to it than that. So if you tell a student pilot, I'd like you to climb, what will they do? They say, no problem, got it. And they pull back, and then you start climbing. But then what starts happening? You slow down because you don't have enough power to climb. Yeah. So now you're going slow, and then you kind of settle right back down where you were before. And instead, I'll show them, okay, what if I just add more power? And that's it. We push the throttle forward. More air's doing the magic of lift on the wings. And so what does that mean? The wings weigh less and lift more, and we climb like this. Instead of like this, yes, we climb like this. And that feels a little backwards, but obviously I have developed an understanding for that just over the course of, you know, cause and effect and seeing the results. But to explain it to someone who hasn't learned that yet is a fascinating thing. And the more it's like the more you understand what people get wrong and why, that helps you learn to explain it better. And that leads to a much deeper understanding of it. And there's so many tiny little facts that once you actually ask the question, you say, yeah, it makes total sense. And I've got examples of those for days if you want to get deeper into airplane stuff, but I don't want to alienate anybody.
I think I don't think you would with this podcast. A lot of people who listen to this love the technical stuff. They want to know the nuts and bolts of it all, you know, and so just that just the way you described that, I thought, well, that's obvious, really.
Right.
When you say it, it's obvious, isn't it?
Let's do one more. I think
Yeah,
this one would be good. Do I have a little airplane around here?
there's one behind you. Oh, is that a picture?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
yeah.
see, that'll work. So great question or great call.
Oh yeah, like there's you go. A little bit of advertising.
That's right. When you look at this airplane, what do you notice about the wings? They're not flat, right? So when you're flying along in a straight line, it's actually this wing's up this way and this wing's up this way. That's called dihedral. And I promise that's the most advanced word we're going to use today. But
yes, good.
When a wing moves forward and generates lift, it generates lift in a direction that's perpendicular to the wing. So if it was flat, if we only had this wing nice and flat and it was zooming through the air, lift would be vertical, right? That's good. It's very efficient because all of the work of the wing is defying gravity, which is pulling us, of course, directly down. And if this single wing were to go this way, now some of it is going up, but some of it is turning. So this wing's going to want to go up and this way.
Yeah.
When you combine two different wings, trying to let you see it there.
Yeah, that's all good.
This one's lifting you this way, and this one's lifting you this way. And you might wonder why that is, because it seems inefficient. Wouldn't it be generating more lift if they were both lifting vertically? Yeah, it would. But if this plane, for whatever reason, tilts slightly like this, right? So it starts to turn to the left. Now, this wing is generating only vertical lift, and this one is generating partial vertical lift because of this turning angle. So, because this wing's now lifting more efficiently against gravity, what does it do? Puts the plane right back in the middle. And so if you were zooming along at 800 miles an hour, and for whatever reason, whether it's you nudged the controls or the wind started to go like this, the plane just corrects itself without any technology or anything else, just because of the angle, dihedral.
Yeah.
It's a great one.
When did they work that out?
I have no idea. But most planes are like that. And occasionally, if you were to hop into a different plane, some of the high wing planes, it's not like that. They're pretty flat, and you can tell. And you kind of subconsciously notice, like, oh, when I roll just a tiny bit, I expected it to kind of self-correct, but it didn't. It either stays there or gets worse or does nothing. And that's all, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. See, you're just full of it, aren't you? You've got lots of great stuff. That's really good.
Thank you.
I didn't know that.
It's a good one.
That's one of the things I love about doing this podcast. There's always stuff to learn. Always stuff to learn.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you are for time, but I always ask pilots this about, because one of the other fears, you're right about the control, and it does help to relinquish that and, give permission to the pilots, because they're going to do it anyway, regardless whether they like it.
Hopefully.
Learn a bit about what's going on so you can fill in those gaps. But one of the things that really helps is just reconfirming when you said earlier on about your instrument rating so that you can fly in clouds and stuff. That's the thing that worries people, is they worry about turbulence, movement, and things like that. So what's your take on that, and why people shouldn't worry about it?
Well, for one thing, again, starting with why it happens, like turbulence is rough air because the ground is heating up, generating expanding air and updrafts that disrupt the stability of the air. So just thinking of it like that instead of an invisible hand shaking an airplane is helpful. If you want to be proactive about it, fly early in the morning when the ground hasn't heated up yet and the air is more stable because it's sitting there sleeping from the cool night. So that might help.
Bobby, do you know what you've just done?
What?
Every listener now is going for early flights only. Such temperature of the ground.
Oh man, yeah. But understanding it, why things happen is again kind of at the core of all of this.
So you're not worried by turbulence or movement or going through clouds and stuff like that? Why not?
I mean, airplanes are built to withstand all of the predictable amounts of disruption and turbulence, and I've sat through a lot of it. I've had to fly through a lot of it, and I'm aware of the speed at which an airplane can withstand major disruptions. And I've never seen a plane disintegrate in the sky because of turbulence. I've always seen one remain controllable. Another thing with turbulence and kind of systems, and you've probably heard this from other pilots, but uh, sometimes a captain will come on the PA and say, we're expecting a little turbulence about halfway through the flight, or we're going to divert a little bit to get around some turbulence. That's just because of this process called PIREPs, or pilot reports. And if you do experience turbulence, yeah, it's inconvenient, but you'll tell air traffic, hey, like, I saw some bumps over here, FYI. And then they might help other people. So you're probably getting routed the most comfortable and you know, efficient way to get where you're going, with very intentional choices. You've chosen to go into that turbulence because it's probably known. And so it isn't surprising anyone, even if it doesn't feel great. And then with regards to the clouds and the instrument rating, so for those listeners, an instrument rating allows you to fly whole flights without using visual outside references at all. And there's a device that pilots use for this called either the hood or foggles, which you put on and it blocks you from seeing out the windows. So you can see all of your instruments down here, but you can't see out the window. And you have to fly hours and hours and hours like this. It is terrifying. But having done lots of that, now when I do fly, yeah, I love looking at the pretty view out the window, but I don't need it. Of course, it's like a reference. I'll say, yeah, the ground's over there. The runway's at 10 o'clock. I know. I'm planning for this. I'm using all these advanced, complicated tools, and this just reinforces it if it's available. But if you're in a cloud, it's no longer disorienting. It's just like, okay, I lost that one thing, but let me trust these instruments. And that's been cool. And some of the ways they train you, we're not going to go down into some scary engine failure scenario again, but they'll put you in these crazy situations where you either have the foggles on or you're in real clouds, and you have to go like this. You like move your head around so you disrupt your own sense of equilibrium, and then the instructor will put the plane in a weird situation, and then he'll tap you on the leg and say, "Okay, put your head up," and you look back up again, only seeing the instruments, can't see anything out here, and you look around and you say, "Okay. I'm speeding up pretty fast, and my altitude's getting low, and my attitude indicator shows me that I'm this way. Okay, so what do I need to do?" Obviously, I don't want to continue on this path. I want to make good decisions in an appropriate order to get back to safe, straight, and level flight, one thing at a time. And then they'll do complicated things and say like, oh, also your pitot tube is frozen, which means your altimeter doesn't work because it's not seeing air anymore. And so now you have to say, what do I feel like is happening, which may or may not be accurate, because if you're disoriented, your head has no idea how to sort that out without seeing outside. But you say, okay, well, my altimeter is doing this, but my other instruments don't agree with that. So how do I determine what's actually going on? And this is great practice. Just use the information you do have, disregard the information that's unreliable or unhelpful, and use what you can to get to a best case scenario. And practicing some of these things is scary, but critical. And back on the ground, it makes a lot of the inefficiencies we see on the ground seem silly, because having practiced it when it's life and death makes it matter a lot more.
Yeah. That's really cool. So what next for you? What next for Bobby Dutton? So you've got your Think Like a Pilot, you've got your keynote, you've got your company.
Yeah.
You've got your license.
Yeah.
But you're weird. So, like, will we see you? Will we hear the announcement over, because if it's good enough for John Travolta, he can keep 2 careers going. Surely Bobby Dutton can manage it.
Absolutely. Well, the interesting thing from a career standpoint is the company is the events company, GBM6, is absolutely thriving. The team is doing really well. And I don't know how much of that I could credit to pilot thinking affecting my management strategy, but my job there has become a little bit more help everyone, watch everyone, support the team. Yeah. But it's a lot less hands-on than it used to be, which is a testament to how Thinking Like a Pilot has served me. But also a reason for me to push this as my new project. So speaking and thinking and traveling for these sorts of talks and events and consulting is very much what I want to be focused on now. And I'm really excited to be having conversations like this one.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I understand that with the commercial pilot thing. A lot of pilots I know that the commercial flying is their job and they love it, but
Yep.
they get their kicks elsewhere as well. They have like they have a portfolio of things that they're interested in. And I can understand that, because once you've got like the high skill and you know what you're doing, then you need something else as well. And yours is kind of the other way around. So your piloting is your like your pet, your passion, your hobby.
Yes.
I guess if it became a job, it might lose a bit of its luster for you by the sound of it.
Absolutely. That being said, I do want to figure out how to fly more as a hobby and not a profession. It's expensive.
Yes.
So I've kind of peaked at the flying you can do because I can't afford jet fuel because I'm not John Travolta. Typically without military experience where the taxpayers are paying for your training or your flying, or commercial airline experience, it's tough to fly as much as you want to. But my goal now is to integrate it where I can. So I've loved just flying around in circles by myself and then landing, but that's an expensive afternoon, even though I love it. So I've looked for opportunities to say, okay, I've got a team in Connecticut. I'm going to fly to Connecticut, check on the team, and then come home.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's amazing. Yeah,
that's proper. Oh, amazing.
And that was big for me because to do a day that has a little bit of flying, which takes up my whole brain, and work stuff, which takes up a lot of my brain, there's a risk of that being too much. And so I've been very careful about not overdoing it, but also very intentional about challenging myself in appropriate ways to leverage it more. And that's been cool. I've also done some great flying for there's a group called Above the Clouds where they use the miracle of the magic of flight to benefit underprivileged youth. So there's a child that's facing some really tough situations with family and with life, and you just say, come fly with me. I'll take you for a ride. Your mom can come if you want, or she can relax and have a coffee on the ground. We'll bring you back in a half an hour, and stuff like that to share this just for the magic part has been really, really fulfilling as well.
And it is magical, isn't it? I'm flying at the time of this recording. In a week's time, I'm off to Florida for the week, do some work. I can't wait. I literally can't wait. To be in an aircraft and everything disappears for me. I can't fly, but I just love it. It's just that escapism. Just every time I look out the window, I just think, how's this happen? So it's so magical. It's magic.
Yeah, and for anybody who's nervous about their next departure, just look at that wing, right? Look at that wing when you're about to take off and say, that wing is it's a huge, heavy metal thing. It's full of gas, which weighs tons and tons of weight, right? Hundreds of pounds of liquid in a heavy metal wing. And now it's standing still, and I could tell it's pulling me down. It's holding me down to the earth. But as it starts moving, just the tiniest bit, it gets a tiny bit lighter because of that lift. And as it gets going fast enough, there's a moment, and you can see that moment where the wing, instead of weight, is now negative weight. It's lift. And that is actual magic to me. It's physics too, but I like the magic part.
Magic's better. There'll be some physics in there, but yes.
Yeah.
People play with magic.
Even think about like flying, sticking your hand out the car window, right? And just, we've all done that, right? Like as complicated as airplanes are, it's just a strong enough hand on a long enough arm sticking out the window going fast enough is an airplane. Everything else, all the wires and parts.
You've just ruined it all now. You just killed the magic.
It's the best. I wish I could fly right now.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I don't get to fly as much as I'd like, but I love talking about it and I love having people on like you. So Bobby, thank you very, very much. And absolutely brilliant. That was great. And there's a couple of bits there that might worry a few people, but I really hope that you've pushed through and listened to the fact this is why pilots do this type of training, so that we don't have to think about this stuff, So
yeah. And I'm sorry if I scared anyone. If you want to either talk to me about,
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah. But I think it was important because it's like a lot of people will be thinking those things. And the fact that you've already thought about that and there is actually training and a plan,
Yeah.
that's super reassuring,
Thank you.
I think. I hope.
Well, if anyone wants to chat more or learn more, I'm on Instagram at pilot thinking.
Yeah.
Or on the website is thinklikeapilot.com. And I would love to hear from people and dig deeper.
Amazing. Thank you, Bobby. That's brilliant. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much, Paul. I appreciate
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.